guess everybody's different. Looking back at it, when I was told that morning, it's definitely a shock for me, kind of, even though that risk was constant, it's still, when your team leader or the manager pulls you in the office, and have that, because even the office, the atmosphere, it's like you can cut it with a knife. I don't know, it's different because when you're a charge nurse, you are a lot more to do with management and also staffing issues. And often I find a big part of it is recruiting staff for the shift, so you end up, I don't want to use the word begging, but you've got a certain amount of staff needing to be, on shift. And then if you can't fill it, you're walking around, and that can take time, finding people, trying
what
to
the
fill
problem
that
is?
shift.
It's I mean, one of the issues is, that they're short-staffed all the time and they need more people. But what I can see is the problem is the people that's on the list to do extra shifts are already burnt out and tired. So not only have they already done a shift, and then now they're being asked, obviously it's you can agree or not agree to do it, but you feel this sense of obligation to do it sometimes. It's like, and you're already burnt out, so then you have to come back and do another shift. It's like, I don't know if that's the best way forward.
It's a bit of a snowball effect, Gio, because you do your shift, then because of various reasons, you do an extension or a double shift. And the random thing is, since I've worked in mental health like the last 8 years, the inpatient units are usually always short, and the snowball effect is now you pick up a shift and then you come to work tomorrow and you might do another one and you just become tired, and, I guess your resilience get down because of you're tired, and if you think about it, if a shift is short of staff, the people on duty have to pick up the loss, so suddenly you've got more people to care for and you're already overworked, you're tired, and now you've got more work on your plate because there's a shortage of staff. The same amount of work needs to be done. So it's a snowball effect, it's relentless, man. Like, I feel for them.
As someone who, after his new grad year, did a fuck ton of overtime, a lot of overtime, you get really caught up with the money side of things. So the money side of things becomes it drives a lot of that stuff about wanting to do overtime. Like most people, money matters, financial stability matters. But at the end of the day, what I did notice is the biggest trade-off was I wasn't able to reset. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't able to sort of come back and do my proper job, my Monday to Friday job, well, because I'd already given everything the day before, and then I was on an empty tank, and then I'm saying forced, it was my choice to do it, but then I was giving more continued to give more even though I was already empty, if that kind of makes sense. And eventually I just decided, no, the money's not worth it, and the money isn't worth it. Some people it is. Some people love the money and love the extra income, but I was disillusioned very quickly about it.
But it's like we spoke earlier, mental health is not a very physical work, it's not like other nursing, which there's a lot of things you need to do, like, run a ward kind of from a general med, kind of, IV lowers and wound dressings and all those. It's a lot to do more with the mind. Inpatient is a little bit different. There's still things to do, but you work a lot more with the mind, so you become mentally exhausted. And when you become mentally exhausted, usually that's when your memory or concentration can be affected, and that's when you can make mistakes, Well,
lots of mistakes have been made because of that, right?
Yeah.
Overtime, overworked, stressed, burnout. You do start to sort of make serious mistakes, and working in healthcare, those mistakes can be very costly, not just for yourself, but for the
practicing certificate as well in the end.
Well, I was thinking more clients, because it's not fair for them that you're sort of burnt out, and then you're giving them half-assed care because that's all you have left to offer, So I don't know. I mean, it comes down to the staffing issue and the resource issue at the end of the day, isn't it? But do you think, because when you look at all these changes and people talk about increasing in pay, they talk about working environment being better and stuff like that, but do you think throwing more people into it, say like we increase our staffing more and more to meet the demands of our ever-growing population, do you think that'll fix the issue? Do you think it's a lack of staff that is causing a lot of these issues? Or do you think there's something a little bit more deeper within the system that kind of makes it harder for us to provide the care that we want to?
I think definitely a multiple kind of factors play part. Personally, I think staffing would help, because if you have more nurses to do a job, it releases pressure from the existing, nurses. So I'll explain it this way. Let's use inpatient unit as an example. Let's say you need a specific amount of staff to run the ward effectively, and let's say you have you've got the correct staffing because new vacancies become available. Let's say you're able to run it full staffed for the majority of the time. It means nurses doesn't have to do overtime, for example. It means, it has a cascade effect. So then if you don't do overtime all the time, nurses hopefully would be less tired. When you're on duty, you'll have a lesser, not such a high kind of amount of people to care for, a little bit lesser. So, coming to work, doing work becomes a bit better, I guess. And at the same time, if you're, week after week after week short, people get angry because you have to do more work, you have to step up to the demands, and that's ruthless.
And you feel let down, life happens, right? People get sick, people with children, their children get sick, there's issues that come up in your house, domestic stuff that happens. COVID was a big thing, it's hard to account for that. So people will always call in sick. There'll always be shortages left, right, and center, regardless of the... But I guess the question I'm actually asking is, do you think more people... So we've got, say, with the current staffing we have at the moment, what's the ratio? 4 patients to 1 nurse or something, 5 patients to 1 nurse, in a ward that's probably got 30, so that's the ratio. Do you think pushing more stuff in there where it's, I know this is ideal thinking, right? In a utopian world, in a utopian world, we wouldn't have issues like this, but in a utopian world where we had, say, 2 to 1 ratio, two clients to 1 nurse in a 30-bed unit, do you think that will make a difference?
Yeah, definitely. And, I don't think it would solve all the problems, because obviously we've had issues, for example, in the past where, beds in a inpatient psychiatric unit had to close because there's not enough staff on floor, And even me working in a community, I've had moments where the family, the patient, the community, so that's me, this person needs to be admitted to hospital because of risks and, psychosis or whatever. There's no bed. And beds is a top. So bed basically is, so that's resource. You don't have enough beds for the people you care for. But from a care perspective, client-centered, this person needs hospital, and then, there's no bed. So what do you do with a person who needs to go to hospital? They sit in ED, or what? Does family have to cope until there's a bed? Or, they sit in our office downstairs, and this person needs support. So
it's hard because if you look at the risk stuff, people who are like highly suicidal, psychotic, unable to sort of really grasp what's real and what's not real, and then you're told there's no beds, What do you do? Yeah. That's a tale as old as time when it comes to resourcing in mental health, right? Is that the current resource that we have now does not meet the growing population that we have, right? So we've had the same amount of beds for as long as I've been working, which is 8 years, probably longer than that. So the area that we work in statistically has the highest rate of population growth in New Zealand. And yet the resourcing for healthcare, and this is healthcare in general, doesn't seem to have increased to meet the demands of all these increase in population. So we are going to get more of that, more people needing supports and admissions and these things, but with limited similar resources that we've had maybe 10, 20 years ago, which makes zero sense, So do we need more beds? Do we need more inpatient units? What do we need?
See, that's where it gets, so something I was thinking about as well is on the North Shore, there's often enough beds, let's say, for example. Let's, entertain that thought.
I'm like,
I know,
is there?
Is there, exactly. But then they don't have the staff to operate those beds. So those beds are closed, which means, you're only able to run a certain amount of beds effectively and safely, which means you have resources that's not being utilized because of a staffing issue. And something else I've noticed, mental health nursing, is seen as a demand through immigration's websites and things. So that just basically means even immigration services is trying to recruit mental health nursing or psychiatric nurses.
It's a highly sought after profession.
Yeah, and it's a
overseas.
hard to staff area. So there's like the Minister of Health has incentives, for example, having to pay big parts of your student loan, just to get people employed. But my question is it enough? Because as you say, we've got a growing population. It's the biggest in the country. I know, talking here, these beds not being utilized because there's not staff to run it. And it's, as we mentioned, it's not just all about, people taking leave, which they're entitled to, sickness, all those kind of things, bereavement, all those kind of things. But I don't think there's enough staff to run the wards effectively, especially each shift.
Yeah, so that's, for a lot of people, that would probably come as a shock, right? So you have one of the greatest issues or the biggest issues that we have in mental health is lack of resources, lack of staffing, lack of beds, lack of actual places that people can actually go to, So how do we fix that? Do we throw more resources? So I guess that's a general question I'm asking. Do we throw more resources at it? Because I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
We are already struggling to fill positions now, right? Very rarely can you find anywhere in New Zealand a mental health team, inpatient or community, where they are fully staffed. And not just fully staffed, but fully staffed for significant periods of time. So not only do we find it hard to staff these areas, because, like you mentioned, it's hard to staff employment areas, but when we are fully staffed, is that enough? So do we throw more resources and have more positions, but then we can't fill those positions, or and that's the general question
so
that I
think
have.
A good start is if you use the word resources, I'm thinking more incentives, to make it more lucrative to get people to consider mental health and choose a pathway in mental health. I don't think this, obviously recruitment plays a part. I don't think I think it can be done more effectively. And secondly, more incentives, it can be incentives with pay. It can be other incentives, even in, careers not related to mental health. Some people, for example, get, a vehicle they can use, as a, so there's a lot of
making access to it. Well, not really access, but
it's more incentives.
Incentives. Yeah. But what is the right incentives? I mean, you can throw money at it. That's one way of doing it, because as much as we'd like to say we do this because we're passionate about it, but money does talk at the end of the day. We do need to live. We live in Auckland, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world, even not just in New Zealand, in the world. And we work a very tiring, thankless job. Is it fair to say a thankless job? So that's a hard sell.
It's a hard sell.
It's a hard sell.
And if you think about it, like, let's say, for example, doctors, I've got a feeling in New Zealand, it's actively trying to recruit more doctors. One of the incentives, don't quote me on it, but it's unlimited sick leave. So
I've heard this before.
So that's a rumor going around.
Can we, while we're here, and while we're on the topic of that, I'm just going to have a quick Google, just because I'm super curious, because I hear this a lot. And I was like, okay, do doctors actually have...
It's a good rumor to
doctors
solve.
in New Zealand have unlimited... I'm just going to have a look. Because we could probably end that rumor now.
So I'm not suggesting nurses in practicing in mental health should have unlimited sick leave, but what an incentive,
How many sick leave? We're going to get too much deep into this. There's nothing straight out the back that says, and it could be from DHB to DHB. But yeah, I don't know. Would unlimited sick leave help as an incentive?
Well, if you think about it, a lot of nurses, have families, and if you have a family and you're working, let's say both parents are working full time, like in my situation, our kids go to daycare. Daycares often say, for example, early intervention, this person, your kid has a temperature, go home. So I'm often using my sick leave, for example, to go home and look after my kids. So, we had 5, I think it's coming up to 10 days here, which is better. But, things like sick leave would help, especially if you're taking sick leave for your family, and not even using it for yourself. So then you go to work,
As a pessimistic person, I think that would be easy to abuse. You know what I mean? I think it would be quite easy to abuse the unlimited sick leave rule because it's an entitlement, so you can use it. You probably just have to come up with a mid-cert, which anyone can go get from the GPs. But I see what you mean. And it's hard being a parent and working as a, especially if both parents are working, right? Because if the kid is sick, then you guys have to juggle who's going to stay home, who's got enough sick leave. So unlimited sick leave would make sense if people were going to use it appropriately. But I'm thinking, as human beings, people try and find loopholes everywhere. So I don't know whether that we might end up having people just not turning up to work. It's like, I'm sick, I'm sick. Or maybe taking, and not even like, and it doesn't even have to be like every day. 1 sick week, 2 sick days this week, 1 sick day next week, and then you turn out that you're only working 4 days a week, really.
Yeah. And still sit with the same problem of a shortage of staff because everybody's
probably worse. Yeah. So actually, you're probably encouraging the shortage of staff with the unlimited sick leave. But I get what you mean. The incentives matter, But I think at a deeper level, the mental health isn't portrayed in a great light. So I think that's a good way to start. Is sort of moving away from all the stigma and stuff that's attached to mental health clients, mental health nurses, and actually promoting it in a way that actually is a great work environment, which it is. We have been talking a lot of negative shit about mental health, and all the stresses and stuff. But at the end of the day, if you weigh it up, I feel we do a lot more good. And a lot of positive interactions and amazing experiences come out of it where I weigh it all up and I think, actually, it is quite worth it. We ended I think you're right. I think we ended the last podcast in a very, very negative light, where you kind of asked me, like, how much do you have left in you?
Yes.
And I was like, I have no idea.
How long can you still keep doing this job?
and that was a very, for me, a very profound question because I then asked myself right then and there, like, because that was a very honest, answer was, I don't know. In the right circumstances, I could end it tomorrow. I mean, we deal with so much. We deal with so much shit. Yeah. Damn, I'm going back into the negative.
I know,
but we do deal with so much shit that you need to have a lot of resilience and passion for the work that you're doing to motivate yourself. You really have to motivate yourself to fucking come to work.
And the passion, and that's why I actually say you need lucrative, benefits or kind of like something to recruit more into this position, incentives. Something else as well, I think in mental health nursing, you get often a lot of verbal and even physical kind of aggression, kind of, especially around psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, I'm not saying it's not happening because when you work in frontline, it happens in ED and all those places. But I think it's, a lot more likely coming across it in mental health. You deal a lot with the frustration from families, from a person who's unwell. And that scares a lot of people, Joe. I think it scares a lot of nurses, if you have that full-on confrontation when you're out in the community at this person's house and you're there by yourself or you and your colleague, that's confronting. And I think that's what makes mental health scary sometimes.
Because it is.
It is scary,
It
you
is
know?
scary.
Like,
It's hard to sort of put a positive spin on it because we've been in many scary situations where you can't just kind of like pretend it never happened, right? And then and you don't want to be dishonest, you know, when you talk to people about what we actually do as a job and the issues that we face, or the positives, even some of the positive stuff that we face. A lot of the times, the most interesting stories just happen to be negative stuff.
I actually have a story, Gio, but it's
Of
actually...
course you've got a story.
It's actually your story.
Okay.
It's about a person we just rocked up to the place, and within 2 minutes, I'm like, we need to get out of here really now. Do you remember that one, Gio?
I remember it very well. That was an interesting one. So
That's a good example.
yeah. I mean, anything could have happened then. So it was a gentleman who has bipolar disorder. I've been struggling to sort of engage with him for a while, and then I decided to go out with you on the weekend to sort of see him and assess him and see how he's doing. But he was in the middle of a full-blown relapse. So he was manic. He was, as soon as we pulled in the car, he had his T-shirt off. He was marching back and forth, you know, on his deck. You know, was yelling stuff out at us. And a rational person and a person who uses, you know, de-escalation techniques and skills would look at that. No need to further assess. This gentleman's unwell. He needs support. We need to go organize that now. We pull in. We see that. I was like, no, I need to speak to this guy.
How well is he, actually?
I need to really, like, yeah. I don't think he's that unwell. Let's go have a look. So we pull in, get out of the car, and he marches straight up to us. And he's like 2 feet away from our face. He's talking all this stuff, you know, slightly aggressive, but really thought disordered, manic out of his mind, just really pacing around. His brother was there trying to sort of support and manage the situation a little bit. And I'm trying to talk to him. Then I'm trying to talk to the brother. And then and then you're there. And then, like you said, 2 minutes later, you're like, we need to leave. We need to leave right now.
Yep.
And then it finally clicked, like, yeah, actually, what the hell are we doing? Yeah. This is not a safe situation.
Because he had a kickboxing background.
Yes, he did.
And he's a fit, strong young man.
Yes, he did.
Completely relapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember stopping at the car as soon as he kind of like ripped his shirt off, you know, and there was moments where he just screamed at the top of his voice out of like just releasing that amount of energy. And I was immediately, my life is in, you know, serious danger. You know, I don't have anything to protect myself. I don't even know how to do self-defense, Gio. And I just remember, well, you know, no rational conversation is going to make any difference. This person really needs to go to hospital for support.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we just left within a minute or two, you know. But my goodness.
I know.
That's a classic example. Just that energy, that screaming, that yelling. He almost punched us in the face, you know.
Yeah. That was when I decided we should leave. That was like, okay, that's probably not a good place to be. But and the thing is, we didn't know we were walking into that. You know, we kind of was like, okay, this person's got this. We haven't talked to him in a while. You know, is he taking his meds? We're not really sure. But let's go and double check and see how he's doing. We work in the community. Let's go out. Let's work in the community. You know, got in the car, and me and you, right? You throw anything at us, we'll go out. We'll sort it. You know, which is probably not a really great attitude to have, because sometimes you need to step back and actually assess the situation. But if someone's like, listen, this happened to this happened, these guys need to be followed up. Yep, me and LJ will do it. Get in the car, we're out. And then we pull up and it's like, okay, this is not a good situation. Because even I knew it wasn't a good situation. But this is my problem, right? My problem is, I need to have the last word. I need to have the last word. That is just my issue. It's just a behavioral issue, personality issue.
Yeah.
You know, I need to have the last word. Bit antisocial. I need to have the last word. The other one is my sense of danger is a little bit skewed. Like I've been in many situations where other people felt really, really in harm's way, and I felt like, no, it's okay. I can manage it for now. Not in a like unsafe manner, but I feel like I'm clear-headed and I'll assess all the situations. And look, there's been many times I've walked in, no, not a good situation, and out in literally 10 seconds. But most of the time, like, I don't know whether it's my tolerance
That's what I wanted to ask you. Do you feel, because you're exposed to similar situations over a long period of time, you know, and it happens quite frequently, do you feel your tolerance, you know, it has gone up? You know, you're able to tolerate these situations more and more, kind of influencing?
Tolerance, may not be the correct way to say it, because I don't think my
Or
tolerance
your
has
threshold, perhaps, like.
I think the better way to do it, a better way to explain it is because that's a bad thing. Because if your threshold increases, then you leave yourself open to sort of issues. Because in a way, an increase in threshold, an increase in stuff, kind of shows that you're desensitized to it a little bit. I don't think I'm desensitized to it. What I think of that's come out of my, compared to a lot of people, limited years in mental health, 7 years, 6-7 years. I feel like my experience has grown so much that I feel I can assess the situation a lot more readily and make a decision a lot more quicker than actually what I could do in the past. So I'm not hanging around because, I don't think there's any danger. I sometimes hang around a little bit longer because I feel like I understand the situation isn't at this peak yet. Which I guess is a kind of threshold, but I don't think my threshold for safety has increased. If anything, it's actually gone down. Yeah. Like my threshold has actually lowered. So like I'm actually more inclined to sort of act on safety stuff more as opposed to the other way around.
Because I guess, to add to that, part of our role is to assess the person, the person's mental state. Because you can't admit somebody to hospital who doesn't need admission. And you need to do an assessment, have a discussion, kind of what's going on, which influences, that kind of, how long do you stay at a person's place,
Yes.
And in saying that, one of the things kind of I was thinking of is, because even families get a lot of the times I use the word desensitize, because this is how this, loved one or something, So by the time the family phones saying, okay, now we need help, that's often too late or the person is fully, relapsed. Not always.
Or they're over-reporting. Or sometimes,
yes,
which is more often than not, is that they over-report because they're burnt out, they've dealt with it for a long time, and they want to break, which is fair enough. Yeah.
But sometimes I'm thinking to kind of help with, is this person, if I'm a person of the public sitting at a bus stop and that same person is sitting next to me, I feel safe, and that's a good kind of threshold.
That's a good way to measure it out for sure.
Yeah.
But that's hard too.
It's hard.
Because we have a lot of clients that present like they are dangerous, but are actually not. And it's purely on the fact that myself or you know this client well or know this person really well, that we can actually determine whether that's his usual, presentation or it's not, So in public, they are basing that on no experience of mental health, more often than not, no experience of mental health, and they'll make a judgment. And that judgment is usually a very unfair judgment, While as us, we assess. And assessing is bringing all the factors that we can see there at that time and then making a educated sort of plan around the threshold and safety, what we need to do next, and formulate a plan around that and an impression and all that other stuff. So there's no real way to do it. There's no, just like what we talked about before, in mental health, there's no real way to sort of just paint a broad stroke on all these people and say, this is our threshold for this, In generally speaking, there is, right? People who threaten others, threaten suicide and all that stuff. We have to take those seriously and run with it, but then we break that down, right? A lot of the times when people talk about, I'm feeling suicidal, it's not new, right? It's usually quite chronic stuff that happens often. And from time to time, those thoughts increase due to whatever situational things that they're in, missing medications, had a bad night's sleep, arguments with the family, relationship breakups, the All Blacks losing the World Cup, stuff like that impacts people's day-to-day stuff. So we kind of need to take all that into account and then determine what is the best way forward and what's the biggest support that person needs at that point in time. So it's hard to sort of determine what's real because it's very individualized, right? We have to base it on this particular person, and you can't say, well, this person and this person are saying the same thing. Maybe we just put them in the same category of safety, but it's very, very not. You have to base it on that person, on that day, and what they're doing.
And Giovanni, like something I've noticed is there's a difference between when somebody's venting. So venting can seem like somebody is verbally threatening which can be quite provocative, and quite scary. So the person, for example, might start screaming and yelling and things, but it actually might be venting, a release of energy, and not necessarily with the intent to hurt you or anyone. It's just venting out of frustration and things. And sometimes, I guess, you can, with the right approach, support that person through that. But there's always a fine balance between when a person starts venting and it can actually go over into threatening, and that's it can happen very quickly, and that's, quite dangerous situations to be in.
What do you notice first? When someone, because you're right, venting is a very different thing, and can be actually very therapeutic, allowing someone to vent, because more often than not, these people don't have a lot of people to talk to. So they just want to talk about their thoughts, talk about their feelings, and they just want someone, not really even for feedback, they just want a soundboard, someone to sort of just absorb all of that, and if they want sort of like an impression or sort of feedback from it, you can give it. But for you, what do you notice first when you sort of notice it goes from venting to, oh fuck, we need to, there's some serious shit happening. It's
actually
there.
A difficult question because it's very subtle. It's very subtle, especially if you're exposed to that level of venting, frustration. I think it's when the person becomes more directive, for example, starts swearing at you in particular as a person, and when it becomes personal, for example, like when that because often with venting there's swear words involved, but when that swear words becomes directed at you per se, or advancing at you, or that intensity heightens. But it's a combination of subtleties, kind of usually when it's it can even be kind of just the body language. It's so hard to actually put in place, but it's so subtle.
Because this is something I wanted to talk about, is there's this thing where you have to trust your gut. As nurses, sometimes you can't put a finger on there's something happening, right? You're in the middle of an assessment, or you're talking with someone, and there's something happening, but you can't really put your finger on it. This person hasn't said anything concerning. They haven't actually done anything concerning, but then the way that they may be talking about a certain topic, or the way that things are progressing, or the way that he may be changing his posture, or the tone of voice, or the eye contact. But there's a certain aspect where you have to, if your gut is saying, fuck, now there's something here. You got to trust it, man.
You have to trust
and there's a lot of situations where my gut has been like, ooh, no, we need to probably move away, or we probably need to leave. And it's more often been right. Sometimes nothing really comes out of it, and it's like, okay, maybe I was just being a little bit too cautious or something like that. But if your gut is telling you need to leave now, you need to get the fuck up and leave. Yes. You need to get your ass up off that chair and leave, boy.
And that's the thing. So imagine this, you've got a caseload, let's say 30 or plus, for example. And here you have, let's say, 4 or 5 people to see in a day. And remember, each person has a different story. Each person goes through different kind of difficulties. And so now you go to a home, and let's say this person is really abusive, verbally aggressive. Let's say, for example, just venting even. It impacts you as a nurse. Each person will have a different experience. So suddenly you have to hold all that energy, let's say, swear words, whether it's directed at you or not. Just, you're a person, so you have an adrenaline spike, kind of your alerts go up. It's not easy when somebody's screaming, whether it's at you, through, venting or actually wanting to kind of, and then suddenly you have to go to the next home visit or, person, and just hold all of that and just,
ground yourself. Yeah.
Do you find that difficult? Do you find it difficult to go from one person to another each day and just absorbing all of that and just remaining professional?
Personally, I don't. Now, I don't know if this is a weird thing that I do, or I'm sure other people do it too, but I find it very easy to cut off what I've done with another person and just leave that on the table, move on to the next one. If something happens there, or if nothing happens there, leave that on the table, and then on to the next one, and on to the next one. And then when at the end of the day, when I'm writing my notes or writing my progress notes, I process it through as I'm writing my notes. That's why I've got freaking huge notes,
Yeah.
you know, because not only am I writing what's happened that day and writing a plan, an impression, their mental state, I'm processing what's happened then and there. But it's kind of like I've had many conversations with new nurses, and some of the questions they come up with is, how do you deal with all the shit that happens at work, whether you've had a good day or a bad day, but how do you deal with all the stuff that happens at work and then go home? So in the community team, we don't hand over like if things are regular, right? And we kind of just talked about, the risk and stuff like that. But, if a person is kind of risky but doesn't sort of meet the criteria for support overnight, or is maybe just rephrase that, or maybe their risk isn't that immediate or great enough to need support overnight, you kind of have to just leave it and then probably pick it up the next day. A lot of people that's come and gone in a job find it very difficult to go home and disconnect from work, right? While as I find it very easy, it's nothing that I've sort of learned or something that I've sort of that I picked up along the way. It's kind of, I've always done this where when I leave the office, it's kind of like shedding a coat, right? I'll take off my coat and I'll leave that at the office, and then I'm free. I go home. I don't think about work. I don't think about sort of what I could have done, what I shouldn't have done, what I should have done. I go home, spend time with my family, do what I need to do at home. Work is not on my mind.
See, that's a good thing because you're able to kind of rejuvenate, For me, I've noticed that it builds up. So when I come from leave, I'm fresh and I'm similar to you. I just leave things at work, pick it up the next day. But I also find that over time, let's say I've worked for 3, 4, 5 weeks or even longer, it's harder for me for some reason to just let it go. I start dwelling on it more. Sometimes I even start dreaming about it. And it becomes, that's my telltale signs, I need a break again. So I kind of know myself. So it's just interesting, each person is
So is that
different.
kind of like your length of time? Around the 5-6 week mark, you start to sort of feel that you're finding it harder and harder to de-stress or sort of go about your day and not think about work.
And it's hard because it's even though I need to, I know, just focus on home and things like that, but it's just harder. It just comes it's just harder to let it go. So it just kind of, even when I'm doing my gardening and things, that thoughts, I'm thinking about people, and it's, so it's harder. So that's when I need a bit of a break.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound very long, 4 or 5 weeks, and LJ is already thinking of a break. But instead of just 2 days off, 4 or 5 days makes a big difference.
Yeah, but that's kind of going back to sort of what we talked about just the pressures of the job. Mental fatigue is such a different thing. Mental fatigue is, in my opinion, a lot more difficult to overcome than physical fatigue. And I guess that's kind of why you get to that stage where you got your usual coping stuff, you go out, whatever it may be, go hang out with friends, go for a couple of drinks, smoke some cannabis. Who the fuck knows what people do, to sort of de-stress. But, each their own, as long as it's healthy. Well, healthy-ish, But, I binge eat, which is not good. But, people have their own coping strategies for whatever situation. But at some point, those coping strategies just don't hold up, I guess, for some people. Like I don't really have that problem, like I was saying. Like when I leave work, I'm done, because what I was about to say when I was sort of going on that little rant was, I do genuinely believe when I leave the office at the end of the day, I have done everything that I can at that moment. Yes, I forget stuff. Yes, I'm human. Yes, there's probably stuff that I could have done better. But when I leave that office, I have to believe, and I do believe, that I've done all that I can for the clients that I've seen that day, And we have to have room for the human aspect of it. We can't fix everything. We can't address every issue that presents itself to us at the office, as great as small as it is, And and I think that's one of the biggest things that kind of drive that sort of belief is that when I leave the office, I tell myself, that's it, that's it, because you can't do shit when you're at home anyway.
No, you can't do any, yeah.
So fretting about it and just sort of ruminating about it is actually just going to cause a lot more fucking issues than actually you need.
I'm not able to refresh at home and come back.
No, you can't.
But then there's I noticed that it just depends on the level of, can I say, complexities, or
let's
say suicide, for example. We've gone through some difficult situations around suicides.
Fuck, have we? Jesus.
And so let's say, for example, we come in the morning. That's usually when we get informed, a person on our caseload, or you've been working with and support has kind of ended their own life. And this is something that I find hard, is now you take all that information. So how I can explain it to the listeners is you've been supporting this person for a period of time, and it might even be a number of years. You get to know this person, kind of, you get to know the friends, the families, the home. You get to know, the children. Often the dynamics involved, what's the stresses for this person. You form a relationship.
Of course you do.
Obviously it's a professional relationship, but you're still a person. This is still somebody that you kind of get to know, and suddenly this person has ended their life. It's a lot to take on, so a few things goes through a person's mind. Then you have to hold all of that and carry on with your day. How do you find that, Gio?
Well, it sucks, So to sort of paint a little picture of what happens, right? So we work with very vulnerable clients, probably the most vulnerable clients we have in our communities. Because not only are we working with Maori, Pacifica, Asian, European, Middle Eastern, we, in mainstream, we work with all races, right? Not only are, if you look at statistics for Maori and Pacifica, they have one of the highest suicide rates. Male, male even, have the highest suicide rates in New Zealand. Not only do we have to deal with that, so put the mental side part to the side, and you look at that statistic. If you're male Pacifica over the age of 45, over the age of 40, either divorced, unemployed, lack of supports around you, lack of family supports, you automatically fall into this high risk category of people that successfully kill themselves, to just put it bluntly, And then you add the mental health side to it, people with bipolar, people with schizophrenia, depression, personality stuff.
On top of that, often addictions.
On top of that. So that's the kind of stuff that we tackle on a day-to-day basis, is in a very crude sort of way. To explain it in a very crude way, we try and support and help people not to kill themselves, for some of them, Now, there's a much more nicer ways of explaining that, but that's a very straight to the point, no fucking about. That's kind of what we try and do. So there's a lot of elements that come with that, right? Personal choice. We don't actually see everyone every day, so a big part of their week is who knows what they're doing, We have no control over their environment, where they live, who they interact with, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of elements that sort of come into play. So when you work with someone for like two years, for, as an example, like you mentioned, you meet their family, wife, children, parents, close families, whatever. And more often than not, it comes out of nowhere. So I would like to say, from my personal experience, there's never really been a build-up. So one thing after another, after another, after another, after another, killed themselves. Yeah. It's usually something happens, something negative happens, something positive happens. They improve, things go well, they maybe have a little dip down, further improve, and when everything seems to be going well, they die. They decide to take their own lives. It's a decision at the end of the day for a lot of these people, Whether that decision is driven by grief, struggle, stressors, depression, mental illness, you know, it's still a decision on their part to take their lives. And to get that news first thing in the morning it's very heartbreaking, actually, you know. It's hard to put into words because you've known this person so long, and yes, it's a professional relationship, but it's a relationship nonetheless. And to be told that this person is no longer with us, no longer alive, and you have to sit with that, knowing you're going to get the blame, knowing that the family are going to look at you and think you could have done more. It's a very hard thing to sit with. Now, there's no real way of coping with that shit. You know, I mean, I'll share a story. It's a story that kind of really made me realize a lot of, well, not really realize, but it's kind of like, it's stuck with me for a long time, where I had this client, he was on an injection. He was seen by my colleagues a couple of days ago, but he was kind of using a lot of substances at the time. And protocol for us, if someone is quite intoxicated, we don't provide, you know, the medications. And then more often than not, this gentleman is always overdue. That's just normal, you know, but the medication still is in the system, so it's still working. I rock up one morning, let's say it was a Monday morning, the usual time I show up. I knock on the door, and this person's standing there. Never met her before. She says that, you know, I asked for the gentleman, and she goes, you know, I'm his sister, but I'll let you talk to the mom. So the mom comes around, and I ask for the gentleman, like, oh, can I see this? You know, we'll call him Bob. You know, it's okay if I see Bob. His injection's due. So the mom starts breaking down and crying in front of me, and then she runs off. And so she doesn't run off. She walks off. And then instantly, I start getting goosebumps. Instantly, I start.
You knew something was wrong.
Something's happened. I didn't know what at the time because everything was happening very quickly. And then the sister comes back, and then she kind of goes, "Listen, Bob killed himself last night. You know, we found him, you know, just down the road." And that initial wave of shock hit me, but I put that to the side, and I started trying to console them and give my condolences and things like that, and offering any help that I can from a service point of view. And then the father walks out, and this guy is fucking pissed. He walks out, he confronts me, he starts screaming at me, he starts telling me, "You are fucking useless, you didn't do anything for my son, you did this, you made all these things, you promised him, you just gave him medications," you know, and he just fucking went off at me, and I allowed it. You know, I allowed him to have that moment to vent and to sort of just say what he needed to say. His son had just died, you know, there's nothing worse than, you know, losing a child, but also losing a child through suicide is I can imagine is one of the most hardest things a parent can deal with. As a parent myself, I don't know how I'd take that. I'd probably react the exact same way, looking for someone to blame, because you're so powerless. You know, you have no more control. That's it, done. He's gone.
It's final.
So he starts screaming at me, and I start backing off. You know, it's like, you know, just trying to apologize and not really saying a lot, just allowing him that moment. But he was screaming so loud, he was so aggressive, so just in my face, that the neighbors started coming out. People across the street were coming out, and they're watching this scene unfold. And I just stood there, gave it another minute, and I said, "I'm so sorry, but I'm going to leave." You know,
because you were by yourself at that
I was by
point.
myself. So I got in the car, drove back to the office, had a word with the coordinators, and, you know, unfortunately, by the time I'd left, they had gotten the notice that this gentleman had committed suicide, and yeah, it was very fucking surreal to sort of deal with that, because it, like, not only to sort of find out randomly, not expecting it whatsoever, but being told from a family member at his house, and I'm there standing like a dickhead with the injection, like I'm gonna fucking give him his meds and things like that, and just being absolutely fucking abused on the road. you know?
Something that stands out for me, Gio, is, it's probably, it's the raw emotions from the family you experienced, which I can't be, I don't think that, that's easy to absorb and easy to take. It's,
it affected me a lot, I think, that day I couldn't work. I was done. I was told to go home. I was like, okay, let me just quickly reorganize my diary. Just ask if people can sort of just cover me for now. Because that's the first thing on my mind is to sort of just make sure that the rest of my clients are getting seen or attended to. But then that really fucking hit me in terms of confidence, I wouldn't say I'm fairly confident in my skills. I'm fairly confident in what I know, but I'm also even more confident in what I don't know. Yeah. But this really fucked me over majorly, and that was probably one of the few times where I left, I came home, processed it, first time I've brought work back in my mind, back home. I was very lucky my wife was here and she supported me and she sort of, helped me out. But yeah, it really, there's no real way to sort of deal with these things, because you've been in very similar stuff too. You've experienced, clients that you've known for years, being told one day they're here and then the next they're not, How do you deal with it?
I guess everybody's different. Looking back at it, when I was told that morning, it's definitely a shock for me, kind of, even though that risk was constant, it's still, when your team leader or the manager pulls you in the office, and have that, because even the office, the atmosphere, it's like you can cut it with a knife.
You just know way. You just know when you get called into your coordinator's office or your manager's office and they close the door behind you, there's something's happened.
Yeah. Especially when the name, And at that moment, it's so hard to describe because a lot of things go through your mind, okay, making, sense, okay, this has happened, coming to terms with that, automatically, is there anything that you could have done to have prevented this? Because our role often is to prevent this as much as possible with the correct interventions to prevent this from happening with a mental health service. So did you do everything you could have? So is there any, consequence from that? Aside from all of that, is, here, I look at my seniors, for example, like my team leaders and things for advice as well. So I would ask, like I asked my team leader, what would you recommend? Me just going home, regrouping, and then come back the next day swinging, like come back the next day after I've cleared my mind, or would you carry on with the day? And my team leader said, no, he carries on with the day. And, so I carried on with the day and I'll always carry on with the day. So put it in perspective as this is a person that, I came to care for, Of
course.
Having to hold all of that and actually carry on with the day. That's not easy, And for me, reflecting on it now, I went through a grief process. I'm still going through that now. There was moments where I actually ended up swearing, I was angry with this person, so that's part of the anger, but it's just me processing. It's the grief process. Something, because, both of us have had now a few suicides. Something that in time I've kind of cherished is putting all the bullshit aside. I mean, consequences, who's to blame, all the emotions from the family, the professionalism, all those things. I often put it all aside, What keeps me going, what helps me heal is I just appreciate and acknowledge our relationship. So the moments, that we've spent together, I appreciate that because it's still, it's still kind of, this person became part of my life in a way, even though it's, from work. But I will never forget this person or the journey we went through. And I guess just remembering those moments we spent together helps me work through the grieving process and keeps me going. What keeps you going?
Yeah.
What keeps you?
Not a lot. I don't know. The thing when you experience in your professional career, in nursing, a client who successfully commits suicide or successfully suicides, there's no real closure. There's no real closure because you won't be able to ask that person why they did it. You won't be able to really know the inner workings of their mind leading up to the action. You will never know what had happened to them previously, which has led them to commit that act. And you can have a lot of assumptions. You can have a lot of guesses, but you'll never know. So you have to live with the notion that the answers that you would probably need to come to terms with someone ending their lives is you'll never get it, A big part of how I deal with it is acceptance, Acceptance, not in the fact that I believe everything is preventable. I think at the right moment, at the right time, a lot of these things could have been prevented. But I do accept that there's a big element of control that we do not have access to. There's a big part of a person's free will and their autonomy and them as a human being that we have to respect and not become too overbearing and what's the word I'm looking for? Controlling, So it's elements like that where I have to kind of just sit with it, process it in my own way. I acknowledge all the hard work that I've tried, but I acknowledge all the work that the client had tried to do. I have to accept that this person had a lot of elements going against them, a lot. And it's like, I don't know whether this is a commonly held thing, but sometimes at the end of the day, life happens and there's not a lot you can do about it.
Gio, this is also somebody that you've worked with in the past as a.
Why are you bringing up my past trauma, bro?
I know.
No, but
it just fits in, So it's because I'm one of the people when I see my colleagues go through situations or have experiences, I reflect on it because it could have very easily be me. So this is a person that, for example, went into hospital suicidal. Was treated in hospital.
Oh, yes, I know the one.
And discharged on that same day and committed suicide. That stood out to me so much. I don't think people realize. So a lot of the things is, so this person discharged from an acute psychiatric ward and went and ended his life on that same day. My questions is what happened since the discharge? Was he planning to do it all through along? Would a longer hospital admission have been different? And that's all the questions we don't have answers to.
A lot of people would assume that the highest, if we talk about mental health diagnoses, people would assume that depression, people who have depression have the highest suicide rates. The reality is actually people with bipolar. Bipolar disorder has the highest suicide rates. And if you're a male with bipolar disorder, that kind of further increases. So the incident you're talking about is a very interesting one because that's actually further reinforced what I kind of already learned along the lines, which is you can have the best assessments, the best well-intentioned programs, the best supports, and sometimes it's just not enough. Sometimes it's just not enough. This gentleman tried was in hospital for a decent amount of time. At the discharge meeting, so just to put in context, this client was actually under a different nurse, but then I was supporting because I'd known this client very well. So this is secondhand information. So this person came to discharge meeting, and when you're at a discharge meeting, you have quite a few things. You have the client, you have the family, preferably if they can make it. You have the psychiatrist, the treating psychiatrist from the inpatient unit. You have registrars, who are people learning on the jobs, so they'll be there also. Registrars are medical students, probably a registrar or a medical student. You'll have the community team or the community nurse there as well, part of the discharge meeting. So they'll talk about the stuff that's led to the admission and the progress that's happened on the ward and sort of the plans moving forward that's going to help support this person. And this person actually looked everyone in the eye and said all of the things. If you had to go through a tick box of things that you want to hear from someone who is trying to convince you that they're not suicidal, he ticked all those boxes. Good eye contact. He was future focused. He had goals. He wanted to do this. He was regretful for what he tried to do, because he tried to commit suicide prior to going into hospital, but was unsuccessful. And he ticked off all of those boxes. He ticked it all off. Yes, there was still some concerns from the family, but it was concerns that was ongoing. It was chronic concerns. And at the end of the day, it was decided that this gentleman is going to be discharged back to his family home. So the family going to sort of, be a bit of a watch, and he's going to get close follow-up from the community team. Very same day, discharge, maybe an hour, 2 hours later, mom calls the duty phone and says, hey, this gentleman, my son has left, and I don't know where he's gone. He's not picking up his phone. He's kind of taking the car, and he's kind of gone off. Then we follow protocol. Contact the police, list him as a missing person, get them to actively look for him. He was later found maybe 4 or 5 hours later. He'd hung himself at their batch, which was maybe an hour away from where they lived, and that taught me that this guy had made a decision. He'd made a decision that for whatever reason he was not willing to continue to live, regardless of all the positive things that his family had said, all the stuff that he had mentioned as well, the support from his friends, his family, the community team, all of these things that in any other person would be seen as an amazing support system just wasn't enough, and he made that decision, so I have to. This maybe, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but I have to respect his decision. Like, obviously, I'd rather he'd not, obviously. But I also have to respect that this guy he wanted to do it, and he said and did what he needed to do to complete it, And that's, unfortunately, free will. We can't account for that.
And something I'm also thinking of is often, especially in the team we are in the intensive team, is we provide often support to one another, so you often do joint home visits to a person, or when a person, one of us is on leave, so you get to know the person as well. And it's not just you and me, but with my other colleagues, is suicides happen on their caseloads as well. You get to know that person as well. So even though you're not the case manager, it affects you to some degree.
Of course.
Especially if you hear about this, and it's people and I've got many memories, recent memories of people that's ended their own lives that I either directly cared for or indirectly, and those memories, sitting at the homes, the facial expressions and things, it's, I hold it. I still have to work through it. Different, different to the person that knows, There was a time I actually thought, should I write the names down on a piece of book in acknowledgement to the people I cared for? I actually decided, and also, for example, counting the names, or not the names, but counting how many people I've either worked directly or indirectly. And I did that for some time. it was not helpful. It actually stressed me out more and made me kind of like a reindeer in the headlights.
Yeah. It actually wouldn't look too good if someone found it too. It'd be like you're keeping tally or keeping
Yes,
score.
yes.
Yeah. But I can see what you're aiming for, like
kind of
acknowledgement.
Yes. And I decided not to do it. So I'm not counting anymore. So if you ask me how many, I would not be able to tell you. It's not because I'm trying to forget. It's not because, it's just, it's not helpful. So I don't want to know how many people. But still, I cherish that moments, And that's me just kind of, because you have to reflect and learn how each person is different. What helps, you working through these things.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because that risk is always there. That risk, and I genuinely, when I look at my colleagues, I genuinely hope none of them experience this feeling, because at the end of it all, you can't help but question your own skills and your own ability to assess or provide care for clients. And that impacts, because that overflows into the people that's still in your caseload that you have to provide supports and care for, There's no real way of how to deal with it, There's no real proper way of, like, okay, follow these 5 steps and you should be good to go, There's no real, just like grieving, right? There's no real time frame for grieving. But grieving is important. You must go through those stages to sort of come to some semblance of sanity by the end of it all, But
that's, something, that you mentioned. I thought about this. There was, because we have a lot of clinicians now coming into the field, a year in or 2 years in. A lot of my colleagues have not gone through, that experience of, And I remember, one of my colleagues, it happened, somebody on his caseload took his life. And then at the end of the day, because we want to support one another as nurses as well and just say, hey, we are here for you. We acknowledge, we stand together. And I remember me just going up to him, just acknowledging what has happened, and he looked grey. And he's this fun, loving, young dude. He looked grey in his face and he just looked at me and he said, LJ, I know what you mean, man. And it broke my heart because I don't want him to know what I mean. Going through that experience, it's different for all of us, but it's impacting. It's sad, So, yes, he's got a stripe on his belt, but it's more than that. It just broke my heart. I will never forget that. It was such a powerful moment, and it, it impacted him, and, it's just sad to see.
Yeah, because I did speak to him as well.
Yeah.
And it is very heartbreaking, There's no other way to sort of describe it. It's very heartbreaking, and you have to, like what the family has to, you can only imagine what the family are going through, who were even more connected and even more sort of like impacted by this person's death, So I reflect on the family a lot during this time too, because I feel, yes, we eventually will move on, and eventually we will get caught up doing other work and stuff like that. And not because we want to, but we won't be thinking about it all the time. Not that we're acknowledging it less or not acknowledging it at all, but the family will still have to have this constant memory of someone who used to be there and now it's not, and from a professional standing point, from a nurse who works in mental health, I see why we get so much fucking hate, A lot of it is to do with poor understanding of what we actually do and what we actually provide. But the raw emotion I felt that day from that father, it all, like, of course he's mad. Of course he's fucking pissed. His son is no longer going to be there. He's never going to wake up again and see his son. He's never going to scream at his son. He's never going to hug his son again. He's never going to have that ever. And who else is he going to blame? The people who are trained to try and prevent this from happening, you know? And we have to hold that shit. We have to hold that shit. And as much as I hate saying this, you know, but learn from the experience. Try not to work more defensively, meaning, you know, we then start, you know, every little risk is blown out of proportion. We fucking do that. But yeah.
Something I've noticed that what we do different though, when these situations happen, is I don't go to funerals, whereas you have been going to some funerals. I actually ask myself, why don't I go to funerals? Is it because an element of, I don't want to use the word cowardice, like meaning that, you know, when you go to funeral, you know, I can experience that raw emotions of the family, you know. Am I ready for that? I guess. Would that help me grieve? You know, would that actually help me come to closure? Or would it actually make it worse? You know, one family just out of emotions can, you know, say things that's not helpful, and it will impact me, you know.
I go to funerals. I go to funerals because that's the closest I will get to closure. But, you know, I also go to funerals because I learn that the people that we see and the stuff that they present with, the behaviors that they end up with, that is a very small fraction of who these people are. Very, very, very small, you know? You go to the funeral and then you look at their upbringing, look at the people that they've touched, the people that they've had impacts on, you know, the people that cared for them, the people that they cared for, you know? It's for me, it's a very nice thing to say that it reminds me that a person's diagnosis does not define who they are, you know, and previous experiences should not dictate their future, you know. So I go because I think that I come away with a more positive feeling after, you know, and I mean, my greatest fear is going to funerals and then getting absolutely attacked by the family, you know, which can happen, you know. So the only funeral I didn't show up to was the one where the dad confronted me and sort of attacking me. So that's the only one that I haven't been to. All the rest of them, I've had very positive emotions, positive feedback from the family, and it's been very touching for me. You know, it's been very humbling to sort of, with all that said and done, they still acknowledge all the hard work that we had tried to do with them. Yeah. You know,
because you form not just a relationship with the person you work with, the client, you form a relationship with the family as well, you know, because often they play a, you know, very important part. So yeah, you do form a relationship, you know, it might be a professional relationship, but, you know, it's still a person to person.
It is.
Do you find that, you know, so it's complicated to say, but, you know, for example, you know, the suicides, you know, often the verbal aggression, physical aggressions, you know, out there in the community, often by yourself. You know, even inpatient units, the restraints and all those things, you know, that's just some of the negative things I just, you know, brought up. Do you think that impacts why there is not enough mental health nurses? Do you think it's all to do with resources, incentives, you name it, versus it's actually just not an easy type of nursing?
It's hard to say because you don't know it's not easy until you're actually fucking doing it. You know, you always like when you start off in any new job, you know, you have these grand ideas of what you'd like to do and you'd like to make an impact and you'd like to make a difference, you know, especially in nursing. The job you don't realize how difficult the job is until like a year or two into your actual role, and you're like, holy shit, did I actually choose the right field? Do I actually need to be here? So you know, I think we have a big problem with stigma. We have a big problem with senior nurses in the general field not being very supportive of mental health as a career. And I've gotten this quite a few times coming through nursing school. when they kind of ask you the good old general question, like, where do you want to work as a nurse? Where do you see yourself? You know, and if you say mental health, they kind of give you this sideways glance, or they sort of tell you, oh, so you want to lose all your skills and then work in mental health, or they'll say that's not real nursing. I think as nurses themselves, we need to be more supportive of each other to actually make a big difference. So I think that's kind of where it's a good starting point. I'm not saying it's going to fix all the problems of why we don't have a lot of people flocking to mental health, even though they throw money at it all the time. But I think we need to change the culture in the way that we talk about mental health nursing as a whole within nurses.
Within the profession.
You know, we're not really recognized properly as proper nursing, because we're not running around changing people's diapers and wiping asses and taking blood pressures and shit.
Yeah, doing vital signs.
But we are nonetheless providing care and support to people who need it most. You know, so I think that will be a good place to start. You know, is that nurses just stop shitting on each other and actually prop each other up. You know,
because when I started nursing, Geo, I actually went into, you know, yes, we're comprehensively trained. I didn't really know exactly what area I'm going to specialize in. I wanted to.
Does anyone really, coming through nursing school, does anyone really know?
Yeah, most people, most nurses, pediatrics,
or ED.
ED.
That's kind of the go-to.
Common. Yeah, I wanted more general medicine. You know, kind of. But then as I started, that's when I chose mental health. So I still have a passion, you know, for general medicine. I won't practice in it at the moment, but so a lot of the student nurses, as they come through, they don't have to say mental health nursing. I just want them to get a taste of the placement, see what it's all about. Just knowing that, you know, this is an option. You know, so you're right, Gio. It comes down to nurses shouldn't be shitting on one another. You know, encourage, you know, that student nurse to have a great placement, you know, get a taste of it. It's an option. But then having the confidence and support to specialize in the area they're actually passionate about without
the fear of being shat on.
Yeah, because even me, when I went through placement, I was given feedback, why don't you do proper nursing, general medicine for the first few years, and then once you've got all that skills and things, then you specialize in mental health. Because the feedback I got is once you go into mental health, you will de-skill. On the contrary, Giovanni, I think it's a specialty nursing, you know, it's different, you know, and I feel year after year after year, you know, my skills actually kind of growing, and, you know, yes, it's in a specialized area, but there's so much to learn. It's a big field.
Well, I feel like we're pretty holistic. You know, if you look at sort of any kind of model, let's use Te Whare Tapawha, for example, right? All of these different aspects, physical, mental, you know, family, and spiritual shit. I was going to be like, fuck, what's the last one? Spiritual.
Yes.
They're all interconnected.
Yes.
You know what I mean? They're all interconnected. So even if we didn't want to acknowledge, say, the physical aspect, we have no choice. We have to account for it. Your physical health impacts your mental health just as much as, you know, family issues happening, your environment, you know, having massive issues, you know, your spirituality, your belief system, your core belief system. If that's all out of skew or not sort of strong, obviously the entire house will collapse, you know.
It's your gender, your identity, everything, your relationships,
Yeah, so I think we actually... Ooh, this may be controversial for people who are in general nursing, but I don't give a shit anyway. I believe we are more holistic in our approach, especially in the community, for clients than in Gen Med. General medicine, you go in, you get your whatever's broken, arm broken, a week later, out. See you later, you're good. You're good to go. That's it. Here's 5 things you can do, out. Mental health, you come in, this is your problem. Okay, we've identified something else is happening. We need to address that. Something else is happening. We need to address that. Something else is happening. We need to address that because all of that impacts your mental health. You know, so I would say that we are probably more holistic than a lot of these general nurses actually like to think. You know, I mean, I ran a fucking a metabolic screening clinic when I first started. You know, where I'd see people every Friday, and I'd check their obs, I'd check their bloods, do a full comprehensive physical assessment on these people.
A lot of education.
Yeah, a lot
what
of
is
psychoeducation.
diabetes and diets
Referrals
and
to
all
the
those
appropriate services. We have nurses that sit in GPs, and do the mental health stuff, but also, relate that back to all the physical health stuff. So we're pretty comprehensive, and for any potential student who's listening to this and has been told that coming into mental health you lose a lot of skills, I would fucking challenge that. I would challenge that very seriously and actually tell them, well, we actually more holistic than anything else. We don't just look at one aspect, which is the physical aspect, and think, okay, we sorted the physical, you can go on. We address everything. If we can't fix it, we will refer on to someone who can fix it, but we will continue to support you through that journey. So yeah, it's a pretty serious discussions going on today.
Very powerful. It was awesome.
Yeah. So listen, for anyone who is wanting to sort of hear more of our episodes, you can find us on Spotify and all your usual sort of streaming sites. If you want to contact us, there's an email. What's our email again? It is theassessmentshow@gmail.com. We're on Instagram, which is the Assessment Podcast. I have to change that. I said it was the Assessment Show, but it's at the Assessment Podcast. We'll also be on Facebook, which is the Assessment Podcast. We are also under the West Network, which is a group of podcasters that love podcasting and just want to release stuff out there into the world. So if you're looking for different Pacific perspectives, anything on sport, movies, you name it, they've got it. You can check them out at www.westwestnet.com. Cool. But aside from that, we'll see you guys at the next one.
Cool. Thank you, Giovanni.